Padme descended from the ramp of her silver ship on Mustafar and ran toward Anakin. He was waiting for her on the landing platform, his dark cloak contrasting with the red glow of the lava around them. When she reached him, his blue eyes shone with an intensity she had never seen before, a mixture of power and desperation that made her heart tighten. Anakin held her hands tightly, his voice charged with urgency as he spoke about the future they could build together, about how they could rule the galaxy and bring order to chaos. She pulled back, tears streaming down her face as she shook her head negatively, saying she no longer recognized him, that he had become someone different. Her words pierced the armor of certainty that Anakin had built around himself, making him waver for the first time since he had left the Jedi Temple. Anakin released Padme's hands, taking a step back as the reality of what he had done began to crumble his convictions. He thought of the younglings, of their frightened eyes when they saw his silhouette at the entrance of the chamber, and felt a wave of nausea rise in his throat. Padme continued speaking, her voice trembling but firm, reminding him of the man he used to be, of the Jedi who had protected the Republic for years, of the husband she loved. Each word was like a ray of light piercing the darkness that had taken hold of his soul in the last hours. Anakin closed his eyes, breathing with difficulty, feeling the internal conflict tearing him in half between the power that Palpatine had promised and the love he still felt for Padme. It was in that moment of hesitation that another ship landed behind Padme's, and Obi-Wan Kenobi descended from it with his lightsaber already in hand. Anakin's face contorted in fury upon seeing his former master, and he extended his hand toward Padme, using the Force to gently compress her neck. She raised her hands, her eyes wide with shock and pain as she struggled to breathe, before fainting and falling onto the metal floor of the platform. Obi-Wan ran toward her, shouting Anakin's name while activating his blue saber, the blade humming in the air heavy with volcanic ash. He stopped between Anakin and Padme's unconscious body, his voice broken with emotion as he declared that Anakin had fallen to the dark side, that he had become what he swore to destroy. Anakin looked at Obi-Wan, then at Padme lying on the ground, and something inside him broke completely. Instead of igniting his saber and facing his master as Palpatine would expect, he took another step back, then another, his boots echoing on the metal as he retreated. Obi-Wan advanced, determined to finish what needed to be done, but then heard a moan coming from behind him. Padme was beginning to move, her weak hand touching the ground as she tried to regain consciousness. Obi-Wan's heart was divided between two impossible missions: pursue Anakin or save Padme, and in that fatal instant, he chose life over justice. He put away his saber and ran back to Padme, kneeling by her side and checking her vital signs while Anakin took advantage of the distraction to run toward his ship. Anakin's ship engines roared to life, raising dust and debris as it quickly took off from the volcanic platform. Obi-Wan watched the ship disappear into Mustafar's orange sky, knowing he had let escape the man he had to stop, but unable to abandon the woman Anakin had loved. He carefully picked up Padme in his arms and carried her to his ship, feeling the crushing weight of failure on his shoulders. Anakin's ship cut through Mustafar's atmosphere, and he set the coordinates for Coruscant with trembling hands on the controls. Meanwhile, in Obi-Wan's medical ship, Padme gave birth to twins under the care of medical droids, her body too weak to withstand the physical and emotional trauma of recent days. She held the babies for brief moments, whispering the names Luke and Leia before her life force drained away, leaving Obi-Wan alone with two orphan children and a broken heart. On Coruscant, Anakin landed his ship near the Imperial Senate and marched through the empty corridors until he found Palpatine in his private chamber, the Emperor smiling with satisfaction at seeing his new apprentice return. Palpatine approached slowly, his hands behind his back as he spoke about power and destiny. Palpatine's smile widened when he said with false sadness that Padme had died, that in his anger Anakin had killed her along with the child she was carrying. Anakin's scream echoed through the stone chambers of the Imperial Palace, a primitive sound of pain and loss that made even the royal guards recoil. He fell to his knees, his hands gripping his head as he sobbed, and Palpatine watched with satisfaction, hoping that moment of total despair would cement Anakin's loyalty to the dark side forever. But then Anakin raised his head, and his yellow eyes shone not with submission, but with fury directed at the man before him. He whispered that it was Palpatine's fault, that the old manipulator had orchestrated everything from the beginning, and before the Emperor could respond, Anakin attacked with his activated saber. Palpatine laughed as he blocked the furious attacks with his own crimson blade, the two spinning through the chamber in a deadly dance of red light and deep shadows. Anakin fought with everything he had, channeling his pain into each strike, but Palpatine was simply too powerful, his years of experience and mastery of the dark side surpassing Anakin's brute strength. Realizing he couldn't win, Anakin dodged a final attack and leaped through the window, using the Force to cushion his fall as he disappeared into the depths of Coruscant's lower levels. Palpatine didn't send anyone to pursue him, simply watching the place where Anakin had disappeared with a knowing smile, knowing that pain and guilt would eventually bring his apprentice back. Anakin left the capital planet behind. He flew aimlessly through space, his mind blank except for the constant pain pulsing in his chest, until he felt something in the Force, a soft whisper guiding him in a specific direction. The coordinates came to him like an old memory, and he recognized the Kashyyyk system, the forest world of the Wookiees where he had fought during the Clone Wars. When he landed on the planet's surface, he avoided populated areas and followed the sensation in the Force until he found an abandoned cabin in the depths of the forest, so isolated that not even the sounds of native birds reached there. The structure was simple, built by some long-forgotten hermit, but it had solid walls and a roof that didn't leak, and it was everything Anakin needed to hide from the universe. The first months were a blur of self-imposed suffering, Anakin barely able to distinguish day from night as he remained lying on the cabin floor. He didn't eat except when hunger became unbearable, and then only some fruits that fell near the cabin or roots he could pull from the ground. His mind constantly replayed the same scenes. Padme falling on Mustafar's floor, the youngling's eyes in the Jedi Temple, Palpatine's satisfied smile when he told him Padme was dead. He had become exactly what Obi-Wan had always warned about, a pawn of the dark side, and now everything he had tried to protect was destroyed by his own hands. Some nights he woke up screaming, others he simply stayed awake staring at the wooden ceiling, wishing the Force would take him to wherever Padme was now. The red lightsaber that Palpatine had given him remained stored in a corner of the cabin, and Anakin couldn't even look at it without feeling nauseous. It was on an ordinary day, when Anakin was sitting outside the cabin watching the giant trees sway in the wind, that he heard the distant sound of ship engines. He stood up slowly, his muscles protesting after months of disuse, and walked to a point where he could see the sky through the tree canopy. Several Imperial ships were descending in formation, their gray hulls cutting through the clouds as they headed toward one of the nearby Wookiee villages. Anakin followed in the direction of the ships, keeping hidden among the dense vegetation, until he reached a point where he could see what was happening. Stormtrooper soldiers marched across the village's wooden platforms, separating Wookiee families and placing energy chains on their furry wrists, while Imperial officers shouted orders and pointed at different groups. Wookiee children cried as they were torn from their mothers, and the warriors who tried to resist were brought down with stunning blaster shots. Something moved inside Anakin as he observed that scene, something that had been dormant since Mustafar. He recognized that empire, that machine of oppression and cruelty, and realized with growing horror that he had helped build it. Each separated family, each chained Wookiee, each tear shed was partially his fault, a direct result of his choices at the Jedi Temple and the Senate. The lethargy that had consumed him for months began to dissipate like fog under the morning sun, replaced by something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. He couldn't save Padme, couldn't bring back the Jedi he had killed, but perhaps he could do something to prevent more innocents from suffering. Anakin returned to his cabin with firmer steps than when he had left, and for the first time in months, he had a clear objective in mind. Anakin began his reconnection with the Force slowly, sitting in a meditation position in the center of the cabin and trying to calm the whirlwind of emotions that dominated him. At first, all he could feel was pain and guilt, but as days turned into weeks, he began to touch something deeper, the underlying current of the Force that flowed through all living things. He remembered Obi-Wan's teachings and those of other Jedi Masters about how the Force was not a tool to be used, but an ally to be heard and respected. He meditated at dawn and at dusk, feeling the Force flow through Kashyyyk's giant trees, through the animals running through the forest, through each leaf and drop of dew. Gradually, his connection strengthened, and he began to feel the life around him in a way he had never experienced before, even in his days as a Jedi Knight. It was as if his fall and subsequent isolation had broken barriers he didn't even know existed. After months of meditation, Anakin finally picked up his lightsaber again, but not the red blade that Palpatine had given him. He had disassembled that saber and buried the synthetic crystals in the forest, and in its place built a new one, using a natural kyber crystal he had found in a cave in the planet's depths. The new blade glowed in pure blue when he activated it, and holding it felt right in a way the red saber never had. He began to practice the ancient lightsaber combat forms, moving through the sequences with increasing precision as his body regained the strength and flexibility it had lost. But something was different now. His movements flowed more naturally, as if the Force was guiding each strike and each block, and he felt his power grow in ways that defied explanation. He could hear thoughts of creatures miles away, see visions of events that hadn't happened yet or that occurred in places he had never visited, and when he channeled the Force through his hands, rays of brilliant blue energy danced between his fingers with a power that frightened him. Years passed on Kashyyyk, and Anakin transformed into something that transcended both Jedi and Sith. He had forgiven himself for past mistakes, not forgetting them, but accepting them as part of his journey and using them as motivation to never fall into darkness again. His connection with the Force had reached levels he suspected not even Yoda at his peak had achieved, as if the chosen one he should have been from the beginning was finally awakening. One night, while meditating under the stars, he heard a voice that made his heart stop, a warm and familiar voice he hadn't heard in over a decade. The voice said, "Very well, Anakin, this is the way," using a phrase that seemed strangely familiar. He opened his eyes and turned quickly, and there was Qui-Gon Jinn, glowing with a soft blue light, his gentle smile exactly as Anakin remembered from when he was a boy on Tatooine. Anakin stood up slowly as he looked at his first master's ghost. Qui-Gon approached, his ethereal form easily passing through the forest vegetation, and explained that he had discovered how to preserve his consciousness after death through the living Force, the aspect of the Force that flows through all living beings and connects everything in the universe. He said he had observed Anakin from afar, seeing his fall and his redemption, and that it was finally time to help his former almost Padawan complete his transformation. During the following weeks, Qui-Gon visited Anakin every night, teaching him the techniques he himself had learned in the years since his death. How to listen to the living Force, how to maintain identity even after physical death, how to touch eternity. Anakin absorbed each lesson with gratitude, feeling layers of understanding opening in his mind as Qui-Gon guided him through deep meditations. They talked about everything, about the Clone Wars, about the fall of the Republic, about Padme, and about the galaxy's uncertain future. In one of their last conversations, Anakin finally found the courage to thank Qui-Gon for having freed him from slavery on Tatooine all those years ago. His voice was charged with emotion as he explained that, without that act of kindness, he would have remained a slave forever, never knowing Padme, never becoming a Jedi, never experiencing everything he had lived, both good and bad. Qui-Gon listened in silence, his smile sad but understanding, and when Anakin finished, the Jedi Master placed a translucent hand on his former student's shoulder. He said Anakin could give thanks another way, by freeing the galaxy from the slavery the Empire had imposed on millions of beings, the same way Qui-Gon had freed a 9-year-old boy decades ago. Anakin's destiny had always been to bring balance to the Force, Qui-Gon explained, and now it was time to fulfill that destiny, not through destruction, but through redemption. He added that an old friend was approaching, someone who would have the answers Anakin needed to begin his mission. Qui-Gon began to slowly disappear, his form dissolving into the Force like mist under the sun, and Anakin extended his hand as if he could hold him for a few more moments. But the ghost had already departed, leaving Anakin alone in the forest once more, though not as alone as before, for now he carried his master's teachings within him. Seconds after Qui-Gon disappeared, Anakin heard branches breaking in the forest and turned to see a large, furry figure emerging from the shadows. It was a Wookiee, and when he got close enough for Anakin to see his face, he recognized him immediately. Chewbacca, the warrior who had fought by his side during the Clone Wars. But the joy of seeing an old friend was quickly replaced by horror when Anakin noticed the energy chains attached to Chewbacca's wrists, marking him as a slave of the Empire. The Wookiee roared softly upon recognizing Anakin, his deep sound carrying surprise and happiness at finding the general he had thought dead for so many years. Chewbacca approached slowly, his chains clinking with each step, and Anakin felt anger grow inside him at seeing how the Empire had reduced a proud and free warrior to a chained slave. Using the Force, Anakin broke the chains easily, the metal links shattering and falling to the forest floor with a dull noise. Chewbacca roared in gratitude and hugged Anakin with enough force to take his breath away, and for a moment the two old friends simply stood there, reconnecting in silence. When they finally separated, Anakin remembered Qui-Gon's words about an old friend with answers, and asked Chewbacca if he knew of any Jedi who had survived Order 66. Chewbacca paused, clearly debating internally whether he should reveal the information, his loyalty to the Jedi fighting against his protective instinct. Finally, he decided to trust Anakin and roared in his characteristic dialect that Yoda, the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, had survived and exiled himself on Dagobah. The revelation hit Anakin like lightning, and he had to lean against a nearby tree to maintain his balance. Yoda was alive. The greatest Jedi Master of all still existed somewhere in the galaxy, and Anakin felt a mixture of hope and terror at considering meeting the Master he had betrayed. He thanked Chewbacca, and the two said goodbye with promises to meet again when the galaxy was free, before Anakin ran back to his cabin to prepare his ship. With coordinates marked as a system without strategic interest during the Clone Wars, Anakin entered them with hands that trembled slightly with anticipation and fear. The hyperspace journey lasted only a few hours, but to Anakin they seemed like days as he mentally rehearsed what he would say to Master Yoda, how he could begin to explain everything he had done and everything he had become since then. Anakin's ship emerged from hyperspace above the planet covered in swamps and dense fog that stretched below. He descended through the humid atmosphere, the ship's sensors struggling to find a dry place to land, until he finally landed on a small elevation of firm ground surrounded by muddy water. Anakin disembarked and immediately felt Yoda's presence in the Force, a beacon of calm and serene light in the midst of the planet's chaotic energy. He walked through the swamp, his feet sinking in the mud with each step, following that familiar presence through the fog until he saw a small cabin of mud and straw emerge from the shadows of the twisted trees. Yoda was sitting outside, stirring something in a pot over a small fire, and he didn't look up when Anakin approached, as if he already knew he was coming for a long time. Anakin stopped a few meters from the fire and, without hesitation, fell to his knees in the mud, his head lowered in a gesture of complete submission and regret. Words flowed from him in a desperate stream. Apologies for the younglings, for the temple, for the betrayal of the Order and everything the Jedi represented. He spoke about Padme and about how his fear of losing her had led him down a dark path, about how he had been manipulated by Palpatine, and about how he had become the very monster he swore to destroy. Tears fell from his eyes and mixed with the mud as he begged not for forgiveness, for he knew he didn't deserve it, but just for a chance to do something right, to use the rest of his life to undo even a fraction of the damage he had caused. When he finally stopped speaking, exhausted and broken, the silence was filled only by the sound of water dripping from the trees and the soft crackling of the fire. Yoda finally looked up, his ancient eyes meeting Anakin's with a depth of understanding that transcended words. He spoke slowly in his characteristic manner, saying that no he did of everything, knowledge he had through the force of Anakin's actions. But also saw he, Yoda continued, the journey back to the light, the years of penance on Kashyyyk, the reconnection with the Force. Your redemption already happened has, said the old master, when returned you to the light and forgave yourself. Now, become you must what born you were to be, assume the role of the chosen one and defeat the Emperor you must. But of help you will need, Yoda added, his eyes shining with secret knowledge. On Tatooine, near the Lars house, find help you will. Your master still lives. Yoda's words echoed in Anakin's mind as he flew to Tatooine, the desert planet where everything had begun so many years ago. The mention of his master still being alive could only mean one person, and Anakin's heart accelerated with anticipation and fear as he landed near the Lars property, the same moisture farm where his mother had lived and died. He didn't visit the farm, not wanting to bring trouble to his half-brother's family, but instead followed the sensation in the Force to a hidden cave in the nearby rock formations. There, meditating in the cave's gloom, was Ben Kenobi, older and grayer than Anakin remembered, but still unmistakably his former master. Obi-Wan opened his eyes when Anakin entered, and for a long moment the two men simply looked at each other, decades of history and pain hanging between them like a heavy curtain. Anakin was the first to speak, his voice hoarse with emotion as he apologized for everything he had done, for Mustafar, for Padme, for abandoning the Jedi and his master. Obi-Wan listened in silence, and when Anakin finished, the old Jedi Master stood up and embraced his former Padawan, letting his own tears fall freely for the first time in years. "I thought you had died," said old Ben. They talked for hours in the cave, Anakin explaining his transformation on Kashyyyk and his plans to defeat Palpatine, while Obi-Wan shared information about the growing rebellion that was beginning to challenge the Empire. Obi-Wan didn't mention Luke and Leia, still not completely trusting that Anakin had permanently returned to the light, but he told Anakin to look for Bail Organa on Alderaan, that the Senator could connect him with the rebellion's leaders. Anakin thanked Obi-Wan and departed from Tatooine with a sense of renewed purpose, knowing he was finally on the right path to fulfill his destiny. Anakin's arrival on Alderaan caused an understandable commotion, Organa's palace security guards pointing weapons at him, while Bail Organa personally descended the stairs to see who had the audacity to use Anakin Skywalker's name. But when Bail saw the man before him, saw the sincerity in his eyes and felt the change in the Force emanating from him, he lowered the guards' weapons and invited Anakin to enter. They sat in a private room, and Anakin explained everything. His fall, his redemption, his training, and his goal to destroy the Emperor and restore freedom to the galaxy. Bail listened carefully, asking pointed questions, and finally agreed to introduce Anakin to the other rebel leaders. It was during that meeting that Anakin saw a girl of about 9 years old running through the palace corridors. Her brown hair braided elaborately, and something in the Force made his heart tighten in a way he didn't understand. Bail still hadn't revealed the truth about Leia, keeping that secret until he had absolute certainty that Anakin was trustworthy. In the following weeks, Anakin worked with the rebel leaders to organize a bold attack on the Empire, one that would take the fight directly to the heart of Palpatine's power. The plan was simple but dangerous. The rebel fleet would attack an important Imperial installation, drawing the attention of Imperial forces, while Anakin would infiltrate alone on the Emperor's personal ship for a final confrontation. When the day came, Anakin sat in his small fighter ship, listening to the rebel fleet's communications through the radio as they initiated their attack, and then he departed toward the Star Destroyer where Palpatine was personally supervising Imperial operations. He used the Force to hide his presence, making his ship almost invisible to sensors as he glided through Imperial defenses and landed in the destroyer's hangar. He walked through the corridors with confidence, using simple mind tricks to make stormtroopers ignore him, until he finally reached the command chamber where Palpatine waited, his yellow smile suggesting he knew Anakin was coming all along. The battle between Anakin and Palpatine shook the Star Destroyer, their blue and red lightsabers clashing in a storm of sparks and energy. Anakin fought with everything he had learned, channeling the living Force through each strike, and for the first time since he had become Darth Sidious, Palpatine felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: fear. Anakin was stronger than he remembered, more focused, more connected with the Force in a way that transcended the raw power of the dark side. With a final and precise movement, Anakin disarmed Palpatine, sending his red saber flying through the air, and when the Emperor tried to attack with Force lightning, Anakin simply raised his hands and absorbed the energy, his own brilliant blue lightning intertwining with Palpatine's purple lightning until the Emperor's light was completely consumed. Palpatine fell to his knees, defeated for the first time in his long life, and Anakin left him alive just long enough for the rebels to capture him and try him for his crimes. With the Emperor captured, the Empire began to crumble, and Bail Organa assumed temporary control of the Senate, working to restore the Republic that had been lost. Days after the battle, Anakin was on Alderaan again, and Bail finally called him for a private meeting in the palace gardens. Obi-Wan was there too, and between them were two children. A blonde boy with bright blue eyes and a girl with brown hair and a determined expression that painfully reminded Anakin of Padme. Bail took a deep breath and said the words that would change everything. "Luke, Leia, this is your father, Anakin Skywalker." Anakin's world stopped, and he fell to his knees for the second time in a few days. But this time not from guilt or regret, but from absolute joy and amazement. Padme hadn't died before giving birth. He had children, a family, and as Luke and Leia cautiously approached their newly discovered father, Anakin felt the Force sing around him with perfect harmony, finally bringing the balance that had always been his destiny to create.